And mindfulness has 4 key roles in the MSc program. Number 1, we need mindfulness as kind of present moment awareness, and we need to know when we're suffering in order to have a compassionate response. So we teach mindfulness in the second session so that we get some traction with suffering. Number 2, since self-compassion is emotionally activating, we need to have a way of grounding ourselves in the present moment. And a lot of the mindfulness practice that we do in the MSc program is of that nature. Anchoring in the feet, anchoring in the breath, anchoring in sights and sounds in order to create space for self-compassion practice. Number 3, this program is a lot about managing difficult emotions, emotion regulation. And so, excuse me, when difficult emotions arise, if they don't pass naturally on their own, then we encourage people to practice mindfulness, particularly naming the emotion and finding the emotion in the body, and then relating compassionately to that part of the body that's holding the emotion. And that's a very powerful way of regulating difficult emotions. And finally, mindfulness, moment-to-moment awareness, is also known as spacious awareness. And actually, in traditional Buddhist psychology, mindfulness has even more to do with equanimity. And we really need equanimity in order to practice self-compassion. Equanimity is also a foundation for wisdom. So we look at mindfulness as a way of sort of creating a frame, kind of a balanced awareness, so that we don't get either swept up in difficult emotions that arise when we practice compassion, or with giddiness from all the joy that naturally arises with compassion. And also there are what we like to say is that self-compassion and mindfulness are BFF, best friends forever. Kristin says that they're kind of like 2 people doing a beautiful dance together. And also, when mindfulness is in full bloom, it usually brings along qualities of compassion. Usually there's a ton of compassion in it. And when compassion is in full bloom, there's usually a lot of mindfulness. In other words, you're aware of what's going on. But mostly our compassion or our mindfulness is not in full bloom. So then we need to explicitly perhaps add something. And therefore, it's good to know kind of what these different practices do. So we like to say that mindfulness focuses primarily on acceptance of moment-to-moment experience. This feeling, this thought, this sensation. Compassion focuses on the experiencer. So one is loving awareness of experience, the other is loving awareness of the experiencer. Mindfulness asks, what am I experiencing right now? And compassion asks, this is a different question, what do I need right now? Mindfulness says, feel your suffering in spacious awareness. And compassion says, be kind to yourself when you suffer. So compassion is really quite personal. It's about one entity to another. You can't have compassion for anger. You can only have compassion for a person who feels anger. It's very personal. And sometimes, like with my public speaking anxiety problem, what I realized is sometimes, and which had a lot of shame in it, I realized that sometimes you have to hold yourself before you can hold your experience. And so particularly when we're caught in intense and difficult emotions, we need self-compassion in order to be mindful. And also, mindfulness is very closely associated with what we call the central paradox of self-compassion. And that is, when we suffer, we practice not to feel better, but because we feel bad. This is a paradox. And this is a paradox that you can know and you can tell yourself over and over again, but you will still slip into practicing in order to feel better. And if you practice in order to feel better, it's probably a subtle form of resistance. In other words, we're trying to manipulate how we feel moment to moment, and what we resist persists. In fact, what we resist kind of amplifies. So what we're really inviting people to do over time, and this is what we teach throughout the whole self-compassion program, this is one of the kind of keys to the MSc program, is imagine that you, for example, have a child with the flu. And this is, every kid at school has the flu, and it's a 5-day flu, and your kid has just come back, and this is day 1. And so your child is lying in bed, oh, mommy, oh, daddy, I feel so bad. And you're kind to the child, right? You naturally try to help the child, do something for the child. Now, you don't have a thought in your back of your mind, oh, I'm going to be nice to this kid so that my kid kind of has a 2-day flu when everybody has a 5-day flu. No, you do it naturally. Your heart opens because the child is suffering. Okay? Now, all of us have the flu. It's actually a lifelong flu. It's called human suffering. We all struggle. But when we struggle, we get into this kind of strategic thing. We say, oh, what I should do is I should fix it like this, and I should do that, and I should do this and that. What would happen if, when we are suffering, our hearts melt in the heat of suffering as they would toward a child with the flu? What would your life be like if you could feel the same tenderness toward yourself when you're suffering as you might toward a beloved child? In other words, a spontaneous melting of the heart. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're going for. And when people start to practice, they're always practicing a little bit of a struggle to sort of drive out their suffering. But the goal is this. The goal is to simply let the heart melt in the heat of suffering.